Well, good morning. Now, I'm going to start the talk today with a new word, or at least a word that might be new to some of you, and that word is anthropomorphism. You might think, what on earth is he talking about? Well, anthropomorphism is something we encounter in the Bible quite a lot, and we'll actually see it in both our readings this morning. See, we have a problem. And the problem is that we cannot see God because being spirit and not flesh, he is invisible to us. Even worse, not only can we not see him, we cannot comprehend him. Because, as God says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So, basically, we're sunk. Or we would be, unless God were prepared to come down to our level. It's a bit like getting Stephen Hawking in here to explain to us all the theory of relativity. You know, he'd have to come down, certainly in my case, he'd have to come down a very long way, as I gave up science in the third form. He'd have to drop down a long way to explain relativity to me. And similarly, God is prepared to come down to our level as human beings in order to explain something about himself so we can understand him. So, for example, God says that he has a face. Well, we know he doesn't because he's spirit. But, as I sometimes say in the blessing at the end of the service, the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Or we hear in Peter that the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. Well, that takes some doing because God doesn't have any ears, but he's coming down to our level because we have, and we know what they do. Or God is described as having hands. In fact, not just having hands, we're told that he says, David says, you have saved us with your right hand. So actually refer to the right hand, detailing that one, the strong hand. Well, anthropomorphism is all about that. It's about God explaining us to himself in a way that we human beings can comprehend. So I'm going to put that to one side for now because we'll be coming back to it later on. I've got another question for you. It's slightly easier. How do you remember to put out the bins? So annoying, isn't it, when you forget? Alison was away for a couple of weeks last month, and I was under strict instructions, of course, to put the bins out. And I remember one Wednesday morning packing all my fishing tackle up, getting everything in the car, and setting off driving down to the River Wye, only to encounter the bin lorry and having to turn round and come back again. Well, actually, it's not quite so bad in Hereford, I have to say, as it was in Swindon. In Swindon, the bin lorry came to our house incredibly early. Very often, we were awakened by the sound of the bins crashing. So, unless we'd put the bins out the night before, well, we had to go out and put them out in our dressing gown. How do we make sure we remember things that are important to us? Especially if, like me, your memory is not particularly brilliant. My former church warden used to refer to my forgettery rather than my memory. God has a tremendous memory. He never forgets anything. God never goes up the stairs and forgets what he went up there for. But in the book of Exodus, he pretends he doesn't have a good memory. In fact, he pretends that he's got a forgettery. And to stop him forgetting things that are really important, he does something. When I needed to remember the bins, I took a tie, one of my ties, and I hung it on the handle of the front door. Because, you see, being a vicar, I've only got 2 ties, so it's a pretty extraordinary thing to actually see a tie anywhere in our house, never mind one on the front door. God does something quite similar. He doesn't give the high priest a tie. What he does is he gives him an ephod. An ephod was a garment which had got 12 precious stones in its 3 groups of 4, 4 rows of 3. 12, each one representing the 12 tribes of Israel. You see, it's not just a piece of ecclesiastical bling. It's got a purpose. Each one of the precious stones, each one of those stones represented a tribe. And God uses the ephod when he wants to remember something very important, or rather when he wants to show us that he remembers something very important, and that something very important is his people. His people. Each of the 12 tribes of Israel matters hugely to God. So, if you are, for example, in the tribe of Dan, and you know that your precious stone is carnelian, or something like that, you see the high priest on the Day of Atonement walking into the Holy of Holies, the place only he is allowed to go, the place where God is said to dwell, and you know that God can see that precious stone that represents your tribe, then you know he hasn't forgotten you. And God says, I never will forget you. And that gives great confidence. Well, we share that view as Christians, don't we? He will never forget me. It's one of our deepest beliefs. We all know it to be true. Unfortunately, suffering can really help to distort our thinking. Maybe you're going through some suffering at the minute, and when we do, we sometimes wonder if perhaps the things we knew about God actually are all true. Maybe God has forgotten me after all. Do you know, I went through a very bad time just at the end of my time in Swindon in my final year. I think I'd only been off 3 Sundays in my entire 38 and a half years of ministry. But when I got to my final year, I felt really very ill, and for a number of months. And I actually had to have 6 Sundays off in a row. Not only was it a lot of pain, but the pain kept me awake, so I suffered a lot from insomnia. And I can honestly tell you that in those days, I began to wonder sometimes, really, whether God hadn't forgotten me. Thoughts came into my mind that I never would have had if I hadn't been suffering, and particularly suffering lack of sleep. Well, the Israelites, by the time this passage in Isaiah that we've had read to us was written, the Israelites had been 70 years in exile with no sign of their going home. It's a pretty bad place to be. The ephod, that with the 12 precious stones, that had been lost years before in the fighting with Babylon. And people had definitely started to say, maybe God has forgotten us. After all, he's got no ephod to remind him anymore. Or maybe he just prefers to forget us. Maybe our disobedience has annoyed him so much he's just got tired of us. Well, there's a wonderful illustration of forgetting in Toy Story 2, where Jessie the cowgirl, who's actually a doll, has a wonderful owner, and she and her this girl play together all summer long for years and years, and Jessie is so happy in this child's company. And then the child starts to grow up, and she becomes a teenager and starts putting on makeup and meeting with her friends, and Jessie, the cowgirl, the doll, falls underneath the bed and is forgotten. Her owner doesn't come looking for her. And eventually, some years later, she discovers her under the bed when she's dropped something else. When she finds her, she puts her in the car, and Jessie thinks, oh, it's all going to start again. But in fact, she's taking her to a kind of toy exchange, puts her in a cardboard box and leaves her for some other child. It's a reminder of what the Bible says. Can a mother forget her child? And I guess the implication is, well, it's almost impossible. It's next door to impossible for a mother to forget her child, but it's theoretically possible. And God says, I guess it is possible that you could imagine a case where a mother really has forgotten her child, though if there is such a person, it certainly isn't me. even if she could do it, even if she could do that thing that's next door to impossible. I never will. And then here's his second idea. He says, I don't need something to jog my memory. That was just for your benefit. I don't need a tie over the door handle. I don't need a knot in my handkerchief. I don't need an ephod. Because, he says, I've written your names on the palm of my hand. Did you hear him say that? There's a bit of anthropomorphism. You see, in Isaiah's day, there was no such thing as an indelible pen. An indelible pen, a pen that you can't wash off. So commentators reckon that when God said this, people imagined that he had given himself a tattoo, something truly indelible. Now, that's a pretty remarkable thing to say, because in the Old Testament, God strictly forbids tattoos because they're associated with idol worship in the nations around. So if you had one, you are basically associating yourself with Baal or Ashtoreth or one of these gods or goddesses. In the New Testament, we ought to say that no longer applies. The New Testament has nothing bad to say about tattoos as such, so if you've got one, you don't need to rush out and get it taken off. But here's another example of anthropomorphism. Remember, God coming down to our level. You see, God can't write our names on the palm of his hand, because even if he could create an indelible pen to write those names with, he has nothing at all to write them on. He hasn't got a palm. He hasn't got a hand. As Jesus points out to the woman at the well, God is spirit. But once again, this is God coming down to our level. And of course, we do this, don't we? We do sometimes write, we tattoo the name of a person onto our arm or hand. I've got a friend who goes fishing, and he had the name of his true love, Christine, when he was a young man, engraved upon his hand. And unfortunately, the relationship with Christine lasted about 18 months, and then he split up, and his second girlfriend, Laura, was never very happy to see Christine's name written on his forearm. Well, that's always dangerous, but God says, yeah, the problem is if you write somebody's name on your forearm, you might easily change your mind and want to forget them. But I won't ever forget you. But hold on, there's another aspect to this which is revealed for us in the New Testament. Although God is spirit, he came to earth as a human being. He came as a baby. He's the God of the whole universe. And yet he was born of Mary in the same way as each one of us was born. He entered the world in the same way we did, and he died in the same way that we will die. And the great news for Christians and for the world is that as he rose from the dead with a new spiritual body, so also will we. This is just the beginning. There's a lot more to come. This world is not the end. There is a far better one with whole wonderful new bodies coming. But the body of Jesus carries some marks, doesn't it? God says, okay, in the Old Testament, God says, I'm going to pretend I have eyes and ears and an arm and a hand and a face, just so you can understand better what I'm saying about myself. But Jesus, the Son of God, the second member of the Trinity, says, I'm not pretending anything. Not only do I have hands, but they have marks, the marks of the nails in Jesus' hands. And each of those marks says to us, I will not ever forget you, for the simple reason that those marks on the hands of Christ will never, ever go away. The ephod was great, a wonderful thing for the people of Isaiah's day or Moses' day, but sadly it got lost. But those marks on the hands of Jesus will remain for all eternity to remind him of how much he loves you and me.
1 Peter 5 verse 7. Cast all your cares on him because he cares for you.
Cast your care on his shoulders. Oh, cast your care on his love. In my weakness, in my trouble, he won't let go. If I lose my way, Lord, I pray, lead me home. In the darkness, when it's hardest, you are my hope. In my highs and lows, cast your care on his shoulders. Oh, cast your care on his love. When I'm lonely, console me, ignite my faith. In these broken days, fix my ways with your grace. When I'm searching, when I'm hurting, you're my hiding place. I'll trust in your ways. Cast your cares on his shoulders. Oh, cast your cares on his love.
Yeah, the storms might come, but he'll never leave. Take his word, he'll forever be source of strength when we're running out of energy. Place your cares on his shoulders, the remedy. He'll give you strength that is needed for every task. And I know he's on our side and that's everything. In the past he has led us even through the dark. And anything we need we can ask. Cause I know that you're with me, you're near me, you're for me. You're listening and leading and loving. You hear us and free us and carry. You're with us, Lord. In my weakness, when it's dark,